The springs of Florida has served as a critical element of Florida's ecosystem for millions of years. People from across the globe come to see the beauty and majesty that these natural wonders capture. Florida's springs replenish valuable fresh water through the numerous rivers and lakes across the state. The springs also serve as home to a number of animals and plant life. Man's fascination with the springs date back to the discovery of the state itself. In 1513, when Spanish explorer Juan Ponce de Leon was rumored to have led an expedition to find the Fountain of Youth, an eternal spring that turned back the effects of aging. Perhaps it was the spring's ability to rejuvenate itself and filter out toxins that led Spanish explorers to believing it had youth-restoring properties. When man and nature combined, there is almost always a negative impact on the environment. However, it is not the traditional type of pollution that is the biggest threat to Florida springs today.
The biggest threat to springs would be, if you're looking at a biological standpoint, it would be algae. Biggest is we have nitrogen contaminants in the springs and aquifer that result from basically a lot of agricultural practices. We have also homeowner practices that they use a lot of fertilizers, which help contribute to the nitrogen count in the springs.
Powerful fertilizers are often used by many of Florida's farmers in order to keep up with the booming agricultural industry of today's Florida. The runoff from the use of these fertilizers can have an adverse effect on the health of the springs that surround it. Farmers often use this fertilizer recklessly, without regulation and without any real understanding of how the fertilizer will affect the environment it is in.
You can see algae formation. Most of this is natural, but there's also examples of other springs that has just blankets of algae covering it, and it's really hard for the aquifers to cycle through.
The masking effect that these algae blooms create can cut off sunlight and make the springs a dead zone, not fit for life. Due to an ever-growing agricultural industry in Florida, it seems to only be getting worse every year.
Even just since I've been here for 2 years, when I first got here, there was a ton of native eelgrass in a lot of the springs, and just seeing the changes over 2 years is pretty incredible, just how fast it's happened. So basically this native grass has been replaced by this algae.
When crucial vegetation is wiped out from the springs, wildlife is soon to follow, due to the delicate balance of the ecosystems that live in each spring.
I've seen the springs change with vegetation, invasive species, whether it's fish, plant life. The clarity just isn't what it used to be.
With their ecosystems in jeopardy, many Floridians wonder about the animals living in the springs and how the effects of the pollution will affect them.
Well, unmaintained algae growth can impede bottom dwellers and bottom plant life from getting sunlight.
The effects of pollution on the springs has become more and more drastic each year. Floridians have demanded that the government step in and take action to protect the springs.
We're going to invest $55 million to protect Florida springs.
As the government has stepped in, people have become more and more aware of the effects of pollution on the springs and are starting to do more to protect them.
Well, certainly people are becoming more aware of it as the communication lines are much more efficient than they were 50 years ago. And a lot of studies are done by the various universities, University of Florida, IFAS, for just really being able to target what is necessary and what isn't necessary. And so going green doesn't mean over-fertilizing either.
Important discussions are just now being had in Tallahassee. Experts urge Floridians to keep an open dialogue about the springs and what they can do to help keep them clean.
A really tough issue that's, I guess the springs has sort of been in the limelight a lot because they've been declining and been overwhelmed by this filamentous algae. So there's this fine balance between making people care about the springs and raising awareness about our water.
As the public learns more and more about the springs and how to keep them clean and healthy, we are starting to address the key algae that the fertilizer runoff creates.
Mostly Lingvia algae and Botaria. And they're just totally changing how the ecosystems function, and there's also been declines in other types of species, like native species. They don't have specific numbers, but snails have declined and they're pretty important grazers in the springs.
By identifying the main algae that are a product of the fertilizers, it is a huge step into keeping Florida springs clean. Florida scientists are starting to combat the algae that's growing in the springs. By managing the nitrate levels, they have seen a decrease in the algae in Florida springs. They are hopeful that their efforts will have a lasting effect on Florida springs. But what else can be done to help improve the health of the springs?
Well, a lot of debris can get swept up from hurricanes and clog up the main route for water to get into the aquifer, which is sinkholes. You have, trees, wood debris, shingles from houses, anything like that, and also some indiscriminate dumping from people.
Keeping the sinkholes clear of debris allows for more water to run freely into the sinkholes, which then filters down into the aquifer. This filtered water flows out of the springs and flushes the algae-creating nitrates away, allowing for the natural process of cycling water to run through the aquifer and then through the springs will then allow that water to run back into the rivers, which in turn helps the river water become cleaner as well. This goes to show how important the springs are to the nature of Florida, and all the more reason to become more educated on the effects of fertilizers in such a delicate ecosystem. With the use of public education campaigns, the spring's health is on the rise. However, experts stress taking a little time to look at the chemicals you choose to use and how those chemicals can have a negative effect on the springs.
Well, whenever you go to a home improvement store or a feed store, fertilizer store, whatever that might be, and you purchase fertilizers and herbicides and insecticides, it's very important that you read the label directions, just as you would read the directions for a prescription that you're taking. The same sort of thing will happen to you if you don't follow the label on your prescription. The same thing with fertilizers and other things.
Education is the best way to promote clean springs practices. Florida farmers can decrease the amount of fertilizer runoff that they create by regulating the amount of fertilizer they use and by filtrating the water that runs off their farms. So the call to action is now. Floridians from across the state need to be proactive in eliminating the toxic chemicals and fertilizers that end up in the runoff waters from properties, both from a residential and an agricultural standpoint. By monitoring the nitrate levels in the springs and the water that feed them, we are able to control the amount of algae that blooms in the springs, and hopefully we'll be able to eliminate the problem in years to come. Making sure that this runoff water is as clean as possible will allow the springs to filter out the man-made toxins and start the process of rejuvenation. We Floridians are the guardians of the springs. We must do everything in our power to promote clean springs and preserve the springs for future generations. Now that the issue of Florida's springs is recognized by the government and being studied by scientists, the springs are starting to gain back ground. The springs still have a long way to go until returning to their former glory. With the help of government and public education, the springs' future never looked so good. We are the Springs Guardians, and we must do everything in our power to promote clean springs and preserve them for future generations. The springs still have a long way to go until returning to their former glory. With the help of government and public education, the springs' future has never looked so good.
We don't need too much.
Being informed on the effects of over-fertilizing, both in a residential and an agricultural setting, can have a huge impact on the health of Florida springs. With the joint effort of Florida government and Florida farmers, they can begin to build a roadmap to returning Florida springs back to the prestige that they once knew. With Florida's plant life in the springs under siege, it's hard to tell if we'll ever be able to return the springs back to their former glory.